The world knew Michael Sterling not just as a billionaire, but as an eccentric titan whose whims dictated global headlines and whose challenges were spoken of in hushed, amused tones across every elite circle. His fortune, amassed through a shrewd, often ruthless, empire of tech innovations, was only rivaled by his legendary love for the dramatic, the outlandish, and the undeniably grand. From buying a medieval castle for his pet falcon to sponsoring a race to the moon for amateur astronauts, Sterling's life was an endless, glittering spectacle. Yet, his latest pronouncement had even the most jaded socialites raising an eyebrow over their champagne flutes. "Beat me in chess," he'd declared with a booming laugh that echoed through his cavernous, art-filled mansion. "And you get my private jet, fully fueled, fully staffed, yours for a year." It was less an offer and more a taunt, a testament to his supreme confidence in his own intellectual prowess, especially when it came to the chessboard. He saw himself as an unassailable grandmaster, a modern-day monarch of the 64 squares, and the mere thought of defeat was, to him, a comical impossibility. The challenge, broadcast across his personal social media channels and picked up by every major news outlet, was meant to entertain, to stir conversation, and ultimately to reaffirm his untouchable status. No one, he believed, could ever truly contend with him. Meanwhile, in the quiet, unassuming quarters, nestled discreetly behind the main house, lived Sarah. Her world was a stark, almost unimaginable contrast to Sterling's opulent kingdom. She was the daughter of Maria, Mr. Sterling's longtime housekeeper, a woman whose hands had polished away countless smudges from priceless antiques, and whose quiet diligence kept the billionaire's chaotic life in order. Sarah's existence was defined by modest routines, early mornings, and the hushed respect she held for her mother's tireless work. Yet, beneath Sarah's outwardly reserved demeanor beat the heart of an extraordinary intellect. Her eyes, often cast downwards in polite deference, missed nothing. They absorbed the intricacies of classical literature during stolen moments in the Grand Library, devoured complex algebraic equations from discarded university textbooks, and, most importantly, saw patterns on the chessboard. Chess was Sarah's secret sanctuary, a world of logic and strategy she had inherited from her late father. He had taught her the moves on a worn, wooden board, explaining the dance of the pieces, the importance of foresight, and the beauty of a well-executed plan. After his passing, the board became a cherished relic, and the game, a silent conversation with his memory. She would spend hours in their small living room, moving pawns and knights in imaginary battles against invisible opponents, her mind constructing elaborate scenarios, her focus absolute. It was a passion hidden from plain sight, an intellectual fire burning brightly within the quiet confines of her humble life. The news of Mr. Sterling's latest audacious challenge reached Sarah's ears quite by accident. She was helping her mother clear away the remnants of one of Sterling's extravagant soirees, listening to the echoing laughter and self-congratulatory chatter of the departing guests. A snippet of conversation drifted from the main hall, a finance mogul scoffing, "His private jet for a game of chess. The man's lost his mind or he's just bored. Nobody can beat him. It's a joke, pure and simple." Maria, ever pragmatic, had simply shaken her head, nudging Sarah to focus on the crystal glasses. "Don't pay them any mind, Mija," she'd whispered, her voice tinged with a familiar weariness. "Rich people play their own games. It has nothing to do with us." But Sarah couldn't dismiss it. The words, "beat me in chess and you get my private jet," resonated differently within her. It wasn't the extravagance of the prize that captivated her, though a private jet was an unimaginable luxury. It was the challenge itself, the audacious simplicity of the wager, and the absolute certainty in Sterling's voice. She knew, with a certainty that hummed in her veins, that she could play chess. She knew, deep down, that she possessed a strategic mind that few, if any, had ever seen. The internal struggle was immediate and intense. Her mother's warnings, unspoken yet palpable, echoed in her mind. Maria had worked for the Sterling family for decades, providing a stable, albeit humble, life for them both. Rocking the boat, drawing unwanted attention, risking their security. These were Maria's deepest fears. Their existence here was precarious. One wrong step, one perceived transgression, could jeopardize everything. Sarah understood this implicitly. Stepping forward to challenge Michael Sterling, the formidable billionaire, was not just audacious. It was an act that could upset the delicate balance of their lives, potentially costing her mother her job and them their home. It felt reckless, irresponsible even. Yet the pull was undeniable. It was more than a desire for the prize. It was a yearning to test her own limits, to prove an intellectual strength that had, until now, remained unseen, confined to the quiet corners of her mind. It was a quiet rebellion against the stereotypes, against the notion that brilliance belonged only to those born into privilege. Her late father's gentle lessons, his unwavering belief in her intelligence, fueled a nascent courage within her. The thought of facing Sterling, this imposing figure of wealth and power, was daunting, terrifying even. But the thought of not facing him, of letting this unique opportunity slip by, felt like a betrayal of her own potential, a surrender to the limitations others placed upon her. The chessboard beckoned, promising a battle of wits that transcended social strata, where only intellect truly mattered. Before moving on, if you're enjoying this story of intellect and unlikely victories, hit that subscribe button and join our community. The buzz surrounding Michael Sterling's extravagant challenge, while initially creating a ripple of amusement in the gilded cages of high society, quickly subsided. For the elite, it was but another one of Sterling's eccentricities, a fleeting spectacle not worth their precious time or intellectual engagement. They dismissed it as an unwinnable stunt, designed only to burnish Sterling's already glittering, albeit abrasive, reputation. No one of their stature would deign to participate, believing the entire notion beneath their dignity. They saw Sterling's chess prowess as legendary, a fortress no amateur could breach, certainly not for something as vulgar as a private jet, which most of them already owned in multiples. This widespread disinterest, however, created an unexpected vacuum, a space where the unlikeliest of contenders could, theoretically, emerge. Unseen and utterly unacknowledged by this exclusive world, Sarah, however, found herself increasingly captivated by the challenge. While the magnates and socialites snickered, she saw not a joke, but a puzzle. Sterling, she quickly realized from snippets of conversations and articles her mother inadvertently left lying around after cleaning his study, was not merely a rich man with expensive hobbies. He was, by all accounts, a remarkably skilled chess player, a prodigy in his youth who had forsaken the competitive circuit for the cutthroat world of finance. Yet, even in his retreat from professional play, his games were documented, albeit sparsely, in obscure chess forums and old newspaper clippings, vestiges of a forgotten passion. Sarah's self-appointed mission began discreetly. Late at night, long after her mother Maria had fallen asleep, worn out from a day of meticulous housekeeping, Sarah would pore over dusty books on chess strategy borrowed from the local library. She meticulously tracked down digitized archives of Sterling's few recorded matches, analyzing each move with the intensity of a grandmaster. She discovered his preferred openings, his subtle psychological tells, his tendency to favor aggressive pushes over patient development, and his uncanny ability to sacrifice a rook for a positional advantage. Sterling was formidable, yes, but not invincible. More importantly, he was predictable. His brilliance lay in executing familiar patterns with devastating precision rather than in revolutionary innovation. This predictability, Sarah realized, was his greatest strength, but also his most exploitable weakness. Despite this glimmer of understanding, Michael Sterling himself remained Sarah's primary, imposing obstacle. His arrogance was palpable, a towering wall of self-importance constructed from decades of unchallenged success. He was dismissive not just of the legitimacy of his own challenge, viewing it more as a whimsical declaration than a serious invitation, but of anyone outside his immediate, exclusive orbit. To him, the world was neatly divided into those who mattered and those who served. Sarah, the housekeeper's daughter, undeniably fell into the latter category. The very thought of approaching him, of articulating her desire to participate, felt like an insurmountable hurdle, fraught with potential humiliation. His reputation preceded him, a chilling aura of condescension that made even Maria, usually unflappable, tremble slightly when discussing him. Sarah grappled internally with the weight of her ambition versus the very real fear of humiliation. Her mother's job, their only consistent source of income, felt precariously balanced on the edge of Sterling's whims. A misstep, an offense, an audacious challenge from Sarah could shatter their fragile stability. The stakes for them were far higher than a private jet. They were their very livelihood. Yet, the magnetic pull of the challenge, the whisper of intellectual combat, was too strong to ignore. It resonated with a part of her long dormant, a legacy from her father, rekindling a fire she hadn't realized still burned. So, under the cloak of night, Sarah practiced. She set up her humble wooden chessboard, a relic from her father, on the small kitchen table. Online, through free chess engines, she played game after game, simulating Sterling's known strategies, pushing her own limits. The digital opponents became proxies for the billionaire himself, each victory against the AI a small, quiet triumph that nourished her growing confidence. The clack of the chess pieces became her nightly lullaby, the intricate dance of knights and bishops her secret world. One evening, unable to contain the burgeoning excitement and fear, she confided in her closest friend, Lena. Lena, always the pragmatic yet fiercely loyal one, listened intently, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and trepidation. Sarah poured out her heart, speaking of Sterling's predictable aggression, her painstaking analysis, and the dizzying prospect of actually playing him. "You're crazy, Sarah," Lena whispered, her voice laced with genuine concern. "But you're also brilliant. If anyone could, it would be you." Lena knew Sarah's quiet genius, her ability to dissect complex problems and emerge with elegant solutions. She had seen Sarah ace exams with minimal effort, solving intricate mathematical puzzles for fun, devouring books like they were air. Her encouragement, though tinged with apprehension, was a much-needed balm. It was the first external validation Sarah had received, a crucial reinforcement that perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't entirely mad to consider this impossible feat. Lena's words, "You have to try," echoed in Sarah's mind, feeding the nascent courage that had begun to bloom in her heart. The private jet was a magnificent prize, but the opportunity to prove herself, to honor her father's memory through the game he loved, felt infinitely more valuable. The clock was ticking, and with each passing day, the allure of the challenge grew stronger, transforming from a distant fantasy into a tangible, terrifying possibility. The clatter of dropped silverware echoed through the otherwise silent kitchen, jarring Sarah from her practiced reverie. Her mother, Maria, stood rigid, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury, a polishing cloth still clutched in her hand. Sarah's chessboard, meticulously arranged with pieces carved from reclaimed wood, lay exposed on the small table she usually reserved for homework. The faint glow of her phone, displaying Sterling's past game analyses, illuminated her mortified face. "Sarah, what is this madness?" Maria's voice, usually a soothing melody, was laced with a venom Sarah had rarely heard. "You've been practicing chess. For him? For that ridiculous challenge?" Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Sarah's chest. She had known this moment might come, but she hadn't anticipated the sheer force of her mother's anger. "Mama, please. It's not madness. It's a game. A challenge." Sarah tried to keep her voice steady, but the tremor was undeniable. Maria slammed the cloth onto the counter, the sound like a gavel pronouncing judgment. "A game? Sarah, this is our livelihood. Mr. Sterling's challenges are for his rich friends, his idle entertainment. You think he would ever seriously consider someone like us? His housekeeper's daughter, challenging him for his private jet? It's an insult, an absolute insult." Maria's hands flew up, gesticulating wildly, her face a canvas of escalating panic. "Do you understand what could happen, my child? If you go near this, if you even think about this ridiculous spectacle, he could fire me. We would lose everything, Sarah. Our home, our stability, everything I've worked for all these years." Her voice broke, tears welling in her eyes, tears born of exhaustion and deep-seated fear. Sarah watched her mother crumble, the weight of her words pressing down with suffocating force. Ambition, a fire that had burned so brightly within her, suddenly felt like a dangerous spark, threatening to consume everything they held dear. She loved her mother fiercely. The thought of jeopardizing Maria's hard-won security was a torment. It created a chasm within her, a gaping wound between her personal yearning and her filial duty. The chessboard, once a symbol of hope and intellectual pursuit, now felt like a forbidden fruit, laden with peril. Days turned into a strained silence. Maria avoided eye contact, her disapproval a palpable presence in their small apartment. Sarah, however, found herself drawn to the library, less for chess and more for solace, immersing herself in classic literature, a temporary escape. One afternoon, while diligently shelving books, a part-time job she held to contribute to their household, she noticed a familiar, imposing figure enter. Michael Sterling. He wasn't there for books, not truly. He was there for the rare manuscripts, a secret passion of his, and often required a librarian's special assistance. On this particular day, the principal librarian was ill. A junior librarian, flustered and clearly overwhelmed by Sterling's imperious presence, struggled to locate a particularly obscure treatise on ancient astronomical charts. Sterling, impatient, tapped his foot, his gaze sweeping the room with an air of mild annoyance. Sarah, observing from a distance, recognized the volume he was asking for. Her passion for knowledge, often fueled by late-night Wikipedia binges, had led her down a rabbit hole of esoteric texts, and she had recently stumbled upon that very diagram. Without thinking, she stepped forward. "Excuse me, Mr. Sterling," she began, her voice a little shaky but clear. "I believe you're looking for the 15th century Venetian translation. not the 17th century French one. The star chart you described, the one with the unusual celestial alignment, is only depicted in the earlier edition. It's on the third shelf, section Beta, behind the illuminated psalters. Sterling paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, a flicker of surprise replacing his usual condescension. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time, not as the housekeeper's daughter, but as a source of unexpected knowledge. "Indeed," he drawled, a hint of genuine curiosity in his tone. The junior librarian, relieved, quickly verified Sarah's information. Moments later, the correct leather-bound tome was in Sterling's hands. He examined it, a faint smirk playing on his lips. "Impressive," he murmured, though his direct gaze remained on Sarah, a silent assessment taking place. "A keen mind, it seems. Perhaps you should consider a career in academia." He offered a perfunctory nod before disappearing into a private study room, leaving Sarah with a rapid heartbeat and a strange sense of validation. He hadn't known her name, nor her connection to Maria, but for a fleeting moment she had piqued his intellectual interest. That small interaction, however brief, reignited the flame of her ambition. Sterling hadn't dismissed her out of hand. He had acknowledged her intelligence. The next day, armed with a renewed sense of purpose and a throbbing internal conflict, Sarah sat down at her computer. Her mother's fears still echoed in her mind, a constant, nagging worry. But the image of her father, bent over a chessboard, patiently explaining the intricacies of the Queen's gambit, pushed through the anxiety. He would have encouraged her. He would have told her to face the challenge. With a deep breath and a prayer, she opened her email client. She composed a concise, formal message, addressing it to Sterling's personal assistant, whose contact information she'd discreetly gleaned during her library sleuthing. "Dear Mr. Sterling," she typed, her fingers trembling slightly. "My name is Sarah Rivera. I wish to formally accept your chess challenge. I understand the stakes involved. I believe I am prepared." She reread it several times, deleting and retyping, ensuring every word conveyed respect, determination, and an unwavering resolve. No mention of her mother, no plea for understanding, just a simple, unadorned acceptance. With a final bracing breath, she pressed send. The moment the email vanished into the digital ether, a cascade of emotions washed over her. Exhilaration, terror, and a strange, quiet sense of peace. She had made her move, and now the unpredictable game would truly begin. The email, a tiny spark of defiance against a titan of industry, found its way not just to Sterling's assistant, but, surprisingly, directly to the billionaire himself. Michael Sterling, accustomed to receiving challenges from rival CEOs and ambitious entrepreneurs, found the simple, unadorned message from Sarah Rivera profoundly amusing. He remembered the quick-witted young woman from the library, the one who had so deftly pinpointed the obscure historical text. Her intelligence had been a momentary curiosity, but her audacity in accepting his chess challenge, the one dismissed by nearly everyone in his opulent circle, was genuinely novel. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that filled his expansive office. "Well, well," he mused aloud to his reflection in the polished mahogany desk. "It seems the mouse has decided to roar." He envisioned a timid, perhaps slightly awkward young woman, flushed with misplaced confidence. It would be a delightful diversion, a brief, entertaining interlude before he returned to the serious business of global finance. An easy victory, certainly, but the sheer unexpectedness of it added a certain spice. He instructed his assistant to schedule the match, not as a private affair, but with a degree of public fanfare. "Let's make a spectacle of it," he commanded, a glint in his eye. A chess match for the ages, or at least for the next news cycle. He had an excellent public relations team. They would know exactly how to frame this. It would be a charming story, a testament to his benevolent eccentricities, perhaps even inspiring. The news spread like wildfire. A housekeeper's daughter challenging the formidable Michael Sterling in a game of chess, with a private jet as the prize. The initial reactions were a mix of incredulity and outright ridicule. Social media buzzed with condescending memes and cynical predictions. "Does she even know how to play?" One comment read, "She'll be checkmated in 3 moves." Another scoffed. Mainstream media, always eager for a human interest story with a Goliathan twist, picked it up. News segments featured blurry photos of Sarah taken from afar, juxtaposed with glossy images of Sterling's private jet. Tabloids ran headlines mocking the audacious Maid's daughter. Sarah found herself thrust into an unwelcome spotlight, a sensation that made her skin crawl. Every trip to the grocery store, every walk through the park, felt scrutinized. Whispers followed her, a constant hum of judgment and speculation. Maria, overwhelmed and mortified, retreated further into herself, her fear for Sarah palpable. Yet, amidst the torrent of negativity, there were pockets of cautious optimism. A few online chess communities, intrigued by the boldness of the challenge, began to dissect Sterling's known games, searching for weaknesses. Some commentators, often women, saw Sarah as a symbol of defiance, a quiet challenger to entrenched power structures. "Go get 'em, girl," one encouraging message online dared to say, a tiny beacon in a sea of doubt. These small glimmers of support, though rare, were enough to anchor Sarah amidst the swirling current of public scrutiny. She felt the pressure intensify with every passing day, a heavy cloak draped over her shoulders. The magnitude of the challenge and the public humiliation that awaited her if she failed loomed large. But the pressure, rather than crushing her, honed her focus. It ignited a fierce, unyielding determination within her. She retreated into her small room, transforming it into a war room. Her modest chess set became the battlefield. The internet, her invaluable ally, provided an endless supply of grandmaster games, strategic analyses, and tactical puzzles. She devoured books on chess openings, middle game strategies, and endgame theory. She replayed Sterling's past games, meticulously charting his preferred openings, his tactical patterns, his psychological tells. He favored aggressive, often predictable attacks, relying on his opponent's fear and his own intimidating presence to secure victory. Sarah aimed to dismantle that. Sleep became a luxury. Her nights were filled with the clack of chess pieces, the hum of her laptop, and the endless internal monologue of what-if scenarios. She imagined the board, the pieces moving in her mind's eye long after she'd closed her eyes. Self-doubt, a venomous whisper, often crept in. Who am I to challenge him? A billionaire, a master of strategy, against me, a nobody. The echoes of her mother's worried protests, the sneering voices of anonymous online trolls, threatened to overwhelm her. But then, she would recall her father's gentle smile, his patient teachings, his unwavering belief in her intellect. She remembered the pure joy of outmaneuvering him, the satisfaction of a perfectly executed checkmate. That memory, that connection to his legacy, became her unwavering anchor. Her desire to prove her worth not to Sterling, but to herself and to her father's memory, burned brighter than any fear. This was more than just a game. It was a battle for respect, for validation, for a whisper of justice in a world that often overlooked those like her. Every pawn push, every knight's leap, every queen's sweep became a meditation, a prayer. She wasn't just learning moves, she was internalizing the very language of chess, anticipating, planning, seeing several steps ahead. She was preparing for war, not with anger, but with the quiet, focused intensity of a scholar dedicated to her craft. The world watched, eager for the spectacle, unaware of the quiet revolution brewing within the small, determined young woman. The stage was set, the players poised, and the first move was yet to be made. The day of the chess match arrived with an oppressive humidity that felt like a physical manifestation of the communal tension. The air in Michael Sterling's extravagant, cavernous study, usually a sanctuary of hushed luxury, crackled with an unusual anticipation. A small but intensely focused audience had gathered, meticulously chosen by Sterling himself. A mix of his most trusted associates, a prominent chess journalist he'd personally invited, and a few high society friends eager for the spectacle. Maria sat rigidly in the back row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white, her eyes fixed on her daughter with a mixture of profound fear and an almost unbearable pride. The faint scent of expensive coffee mingled with the metallic tang of unspoken nerves. Sterling made his entrance precisely at the appointed time, striding in with an air of absolute, unchallenged confidence. He wore a custom-tailored silk suit, his posture exuding an almost regal disdain for the gravity of the moment. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk played on his lips as he surveyed the room, his gaze briefly flicking over Sarah, a dismissive glint in his eyes. He approached the exquisite antique chessboard, custom-made from rare ebony and ivory, which sat majestically on a polished mahogany table. He gestured to the white pieces with a theatrical flourish, an unspoken assumption of superiority. "Ladies first," he boomed, his voice carrying an undertone of amusement, clearly intended to disarm and intimidate. Sarah, already seated, offered a quiet, almost imperceptible nod. The initial moments were a blur of polite formalities and the rhythmic click of the clock. Sterling opened with a queen's gambit, a classic assertive move he favored, designed to immediately seize the center of the board and establish dominance. He made his first few moves with an almost casual indifference, leaning back slightly in his chair, occasionally glancing at his assembled guests as if sharing an inside joke. He even chuckled lightly after moving a knight, a low, rumbling sound that was clearly audible in the tense silence. "A little out of your depth, perhaps, dear girl," he murmured, not unkindly, but with an underlying condescension that cut deep. The journalist scribbled furiously, already envisioning the headline, "Billionaire's Amusing Diversion." Maria flinched, her heart sinking, but Sarah's expression remained unreadable, a mask of serene concentration. Sarah, however, remained composed, her focus unwavering. She met his powerful opening with an unexpected and deceptively simple defense, a variation she had meticulously studied from her father's old chess books. Her response wasn't flashy, but it was solid, carefully considering every potential ramification. She moved her pawn, then her knight, each action deliberate, measured, as if she were in a world entirely her own, oblivious to the eyes scrutinizing her every twitch. Sterling, expecting a more conventional, perhaps even timid reaction from a novice, found his initial moves met with surprising resistance. His second move, a seemingly innocuous pawn advance, was parried with an unexpected pawn capture that seemed to open up a vulnerable flank he hadn't anticipated. A subtle shift began to occur in the atmosphere. The casual chatter among Sterling's associates, which had been a low hum, slowly faded into complete silence. Their polite, anticipatory smiles began to falter, replaced by expressions of dawning curiosity. Sterling himself, after his fourth move, leaned forward slightly, his posture becoming less relaxed, more attentive. He paused for a noticeably longer time before making his fifth move, his brow furrowing almost imperceptibly. He took a sip from the crystal glass of water beside him, his gaze never leaving the board. Sarah continued her strategic play, each move a calculated whisper in the loud silence. She wasn't playing aggressively, she was playing smart. She wasn't just reacting to Sterling, she was subtly guiding the game's narrative, drawing him into positions he hadn't fully considered. She advanced a bishop to an unexpected square, creating a long-range threat that Sterling had to immediately address, forcing him to deviate from his planned attack. His initial amusement was replaced by a more serious, almost contemplative expression. The casual confidence in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a glint of genuine analytical engagement. He studied the board intently, his fingers hovering over a piece, then retracting. Another minute ticked by on the chess clock. The journalist, who had been leaning back in his chair, now sat upright, his pen poised, his eyes darting between Sarah's calm face and Sterling's increasingly focused demeanor. He sensed something unfolding that didn't fit the expected narrative. The laughter had died down completely, replaced by a growing sense of discomfort among the spectators. They hadn't come to see a genuinely challenging match. They had come to witness Sterling's swift, predictable triumph. But Sarah wasn't yielding, not an inch. Sterling finally moved, his piece landing with a heavier thud than before. It was a defensive move, a clear signal that Sarah's quiet, strategic opening had already forced him to reconsider his initial, aggressive plan. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the audience. Maria, though still terrified, felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark of conviction that perhaps, just perhaps, her daughter wasn't outmatched. Sterling's face, once a picture of bored amusement, now held a dawning realization. This wasn't the easy victory he'd anticipated. This wasn't a diversion, this was a game. And the maid's daughter, with her quiet strength and brilliant mind, wasn't just playing, she was competing. The true battle had begun. The air in the grand drawing room, usually still and hushed, now crackled with an almost palpable tension. Sunlight streaming through the tall arched windows illuminated dust motes dancing in the charged atmosphere, seeming to slow their descent as if in deference to the unfolding drama. Sarah, outwardly a picture of calm composure, felt the relentless drumbeat of her own heart against her ribs, each beat a tiny explosion of fear and determination. Across the intricately carved chess table, Michael Sterling, his earlier confident smirk entirely vanished, leaned forward, his brow furrowed in a deep, unfamiliar concentration. The casualness with which he had begun the game, the almost dismissive flick of his wrist as he moved his pieces, was long gone. It had been systematically eroded by Sarah's unwavering precision, her unexpected strategic depth. He had started with a classic King's Indian defense, a solid, well-known opening, expecting her to follow a predictable line. Instead, Sarah had veered into a sharp, almost aggressive variation he hadn't fully prepared for, a line that punished even a slight deviation from optimal play. His initial amusement had faded after her fifth move, replaced by a flicker of surprise when she sacrificed a knight for positional advantage, a bold move that had left his experienced chess coach observing silently from the corner, wide-eyed. By the 10th move, Sterling's eyes had narrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line. He had begun to take longer over his decisions, tapping his fingers impatiently on the polished mahogany. The invisible pressure from the growing complexity of the board state was visibly weighing on him. Maria, perched on the edge of a velvet armchair, her knuckles white as she gripped them, felt every nuance of the game's shift. Her gaze darted between her daughter's serene face and Sterling's increasingly agitated demeanor. A deep, primal fear coiled in her stomach. This was more than just a game. It was a tightrope walk over an abyss. She wanted to rush forward, to pull Sarah away from the intensity, to shield her from the billionaire's piercing gaze and the expectant hush of the room. Yet, she also saw the fierce light in Sarah's eyes, the quiet strength that had always burned within her, now fully unleashed. Pride swelled within Maria, a powerful surge that warred with her terror. Every calculated move Sarah made was a testament to hours of solitary study, to a hidden intellect Maria had only glimpsed. For Sarah, the external world had shrunk to the 64 squares before her. The hushed whispers of Sterling's associates, the click of a camera from a discreet journalist, even her mother's anxious presence, all faded into a distant hum. Her entire being was focused on the intricate dance of the pieces, the endless possibilities, the cold logic of the game. Her heart hammered, an insistent rhythm against her chest, but her hands remained steady. Each move required a deep breath, a moment of visualization, tracing multiple lines of attack and defense in her mind. She could feel the weight of expectation, not just from the few spectators, but from her own desire to honor her father, to prove that intellect knew no social boundaries. The jet, the potential wealth, it was all secondary to the profound satisfaction of outthinking her formidable opponent. This was her moment, her stage. Sterling, unaccustomed to being outmaneuvered, especially by someone he had so thoroughly underestimated, felt a cold dread begin to seep into his usually unshakable confidence. He had always been in control, both on and off the board. His life was a meticulously planned game, and he rarely encountered unexpected moves, let alone unforeseen checkmates. He had played countless games, won innumerable challenges, but never had he felt such persistent, quiet pressure. Sarah wasn't just playing moves. She was dissecting his thought processes, anticipating his reactions, and systematically dismantling his position. He saw a complex series of moves unfolding, a trap meticulously laid out, and he couldn't find a way out. His mind raced, desperately searching for a counter, a tactical shot, anything to reverse the tide. But Sarah had sealed off every escape route. Then it happened. Under the immense psychological duress, hurried by his own frustration and the unfamiliar sensation of being on the back foot, Sterling made a critical error. His queen, usually a dominant force, found itself isolated, precariously positioned. He had intended a different square, a more defensive one, but his hand had wavered, his judgment clouded by the rising tide of panic. The moment the piece settled on the wrong square, a sharp intake of breath rippled through the small audience. Maria gasped, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound. Sterling himself froze, his eyes widening as he immediately recognized the blunder. It was a mistake born of ego and impatience, a desperation to break free from Sarah's vice-like grip on the game. Sarah, though her adrenaline was surging, remained outwardly impassive. Her eyes scanned the board, not dwelling on Sterling's mistake, but instantly calculating its implications. The error opened a devastating line for her, a series of forced moves that would lead directly to an overwhelming advantage. Her fingers, despite the internal tremor, moved with deliberate grace. She advanced her rook, pinning Sterling's queen irrevocably. The move was elegant, decisive, and spoke volumes. It wasn't just a physical move, it was a statement. The room held its breath, everyone, even Sterling, understanding the gravity of that single, powerful action. The game had irrevocably turned. Her dominant position was now undeniable, signaling an impending victory that no one, least of all Michael Sterling, had ever thought possible. The silence in the room deepened, thick with the weight of consequence. Sarah's eyes, bright with an intensity that belied her calm exterior, locked onto Sterling's. Her hand hovered over the final piece, a knight poised to deliver the coup de grace. The air in the room was thick, heavy with anticipation, every breath held, every gaze fixed on the chessboard. She saw Sterling's shoulders slump almost imperceptibly, a telltale sign that he, too, recognized the inevitable. This wasn't merely a tactical advantage, it was the final nail, the decisive blow. With a gentle, almost reverent touch, Sarah moved her knight forward, placing it on the square that sealed his fate. The click of the piece against the wood echoed unnaturally loud in the profound silence. Then, her voice, clear and steady, cut through the tension, a quiet declaration that resonated with undeniable authority. Checkmate. A thunderous silence descended upon the room, heavier than any storm. It wasn't the silence of polite applause or hushed admiration, but a stunned, absolute quietude, as if the very air had been sucked out. Sterling, who had prided himself on maintaining an iron facade, sat utterly motionless, his gaze fixed on the board, on the perfectly positioned knight that had rendered his king utterly defenseless. His lips parted slightly, but no sound emerged. Disbelief warred with comprehension in his eyes. He slowly, painstakingly, ran his mental calculations one last time, desperately searching for an escape, a hidden defense, a forgotten loophole. There was none. The board was a testament to Sarah's flawless execution, her strategic brilliance. His meticulously crafted empire, for this brief, intense moment, had been brought to its knees by a quiet young woman. The realization dawned on him, not with a sudden flash, but with a slow, inescapable burn. He had lost. His composure, a lifelong shield, began to crack, ever so slightly at first, then more visibly. The arrogant smirk that had been a permanent fixture of his public persona vanished, replaced by a flicker of raw, unvarnished vulnerability. It was a sight rarely witnessed, perhaps never by those gathered in the room. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, now held a bewildered introspection. He looked at Sarah, not with anger, nor with the dismissive contempt he had so readily displayed before, but with a dawning awareness that shook him to his core. He had not anticipated this. He had anticipated an easy win, a laughable challenge, a brief amusement. He had certainly not anticipated such a brilliant mind, lurking beneath the unassuming exterior of his housekeeper's daughter. This defeat, sharp and unequivocal, became a profound personal revelation for Michael Sterling. His arrogance, his ingrained habit of judging people by their social standing and outward appearances, had blinded him completely. He had seen Sarah as an extension of her mother's role, a background figure, certainly not an intellectual equal, let alone a superior. The checkmate wasn't just a loss of a chess game. It was a demolition of his own preconceived notions, a forceful reminder that true talent and intellect could arise from anywhere, unburdened by wealth or status. The laugh of dismissal, the casual arrogance that had defined his initial approach to this challenge, now seemed hollow, a stark monument to his own hubris. It felt distant, belonging to a different man, a man whose worldview was now crumbling around him. He breathed deeply, as if inhaling a new reality. A slow, deliberate breath escaped him, and when he finally looked at Sarah again, the shift was palpable. The contempt, the condescension, the dismissive amusement, all had been swept away, replaced by something entirely new, a profound, almost reverent respect. His gaze lingered on her, studying her not as Maria's daughter, but as an extraordinary individual, a mind that had just thoroughly bested his own. He slowly extended his hand across the board, a gesture devoid of irony or sarcasm, a genuine acknowledgement of her victory. The hand that had dismissed her existence barely an hour ago now offered a silent, solemn tribute. The weight of his own misjudgment settled heavily upon him, yet paradoxically, there was also a strange sense of liberation. He had been so sure of his own intellectual superiority, so insulated by his wealth and position, that he had stopped seeing the world, truly seeing people, beyond his gilded cage. Sarah had shattered that cage, not with a roar, but with a quiet, decisive move. He finally spoke, his voice raspy, a stark contrast to his usual booming confidence. "Sarah," he began, the name pronounced with a newfound respect, a recognition of her personhood. "That was extraordinary." He paused, searching for the right words, words that felt inadequate to convey the seismic shift that had just occurred within him. "I haven't been so thoroughly outplayed in decades, perhaps ever." A wry, almost humble smile touched his lips, a genuine expression this time. It was the smile of a man who had faced a mirror and seen his own flaws, a man who, for the first time in a long time, felt genuinely humbled. This was not the Michael Sterling the world knew, nor the one Sarah had braced herself to face. This was a man undergoing a profound transformation, his rigid perceptions melting away before the undeniable brilliance of a young woman he had so carelessly overlooked. The jet, the prize, still loomed unspoken, but its significance had subtly changed. It was no longer just a wager, it was a symbol of a paradigm shift, a testament to a victory far greater than a mere game. The air in the room hung heavy, thick with the unvoiced realization of Sterling's precarious position. Sarah, with a calm that belied the storm raging within her, leaned forward. Her hand, steady and purposeful, reached for her knight. With a soft click that resonated like a clap of thunder in the hushed space, she placed it on the final decisive square. "Checkmate," she stated, her voice clear and unwavering, the single word cutting through the tension. A collective gasp swept through the small crowd. Maria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and overwhelming pride. Sterling, initially frozen, stared at the board, then at Sarah, then back at the board, as if expecting the pieces to rearrange themselves, to deny the undeniable. His jaw, usually set in an expression of confident authority, now hung slightly agape. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale, almost translucent beneath the harsh lights. He blinked slowly, processing the unthinkable. Defeat. Utter, complete, and public defeat, delivered by someone he had dismissed as little more than an inconvenience. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. Sterling's mind, usually a whirlwind of strategic calculations and business acquisitions, was uncharacteristically blank. He had anticipated a quick, easy victory, a brief amusement before returning to his immensely important life. Instead, his world had been momentarily, and quite profoundly, upended. His reputation, his legendary invincibility, had just been chipped away, not by a corporate rival or a market downturn, but by a young woman whose existence he had barely acknowledged hours before. Then, slowly, a flicker of something new ignited in his eyes. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was a profound, almost disorienting realization. The arrogance that had been his constant companion, the assumption of superiority that had colored every interaction for decades, suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. He saw not just the chessboard, but his entire perspective laid bare, exposed as narrow and flawed. He had judged, dismissed, and underestimated, and the universe had just served him a humbling, intricate lesson in return. This wasn't merely a game lost. It was a revelation, a shattering of his self-imposed illusion of omnipotence. His customary, sneering laugh of dismissal was nowhere to be found. Instead, a genuine, albeit stunned, acknowledgement of her sheer brilliance began to dawn on his face. He took a deep, shuddering breath, a sound that seemed to pull him back from the precipice of his shattered ego. He pushed his chair back slowly, the scrape of its legs against the polished floor echoing loudly. He stood, his imposing height now seeming less like a symbol of power and more like a human figure grappling with an unexpected truth. He walked around the table, his eyes never leaving Sarah's. "Ms. Rodriguez," he said, his voice surprisingly subdued, devoid of its usual bluster. He paused, collecting his thoughts, a rare and visible effort. I misjudged." The admission was monumental, a confession he likely hadn't uttered in decades. Completely, utterly, magnificently. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips, a new kind of smile, one tinged with respect rather than amusement. "You did not just beat me at chess. You exposed me to myself. And for that," he extended a hand, "I am profoundly impressed." Sarah met his gaze, her own composure impeccable. She shook his hand firmly, a silent acknowledgement of the new dynamic between them. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling." He pulled his hand back, then gestured around the room. "The jet, of course, is yours. My word is my bond." The words, often spoken with a triumphant flourish, were now delivered with a quiet sincerity. But he wasn't finished. This defeat, this revelation, had sparked something more within him. His old life, the one dictated purely by ego and superficial judgments, truly felt like it had stopped breathing. But more than that, he continued, his gaze unwavering, "I have seen a mind today, Ms. Rodriguez, that is simply exceptional. Brilliance like yours should not be confined to a single victory, however spectacular." He looked at Maria, then back at Sarah. "Consider this an unconditional offer. Tuition, living expenses, anything you need to pursue the finest education in the world, at any institution you choose. My foundation will cover it, no questions asked, no strings attached." Maria, who had been silently weeping tears of joy and relief, now openly sobbed, covering her mouth to muffle the sound. Sarah's eyes, usually so focused, now swam with unshed tears. This wasn't just a scholarship. It was an open door to a future she had only dared to dream of in her wildest fantasies. It was validation, not just of her intellect, but of every late night spent studying, every chess move practiced, every moment of doubt overcome. It honored her father's legacy in a way she hadn't thought possible, taking his lessons and transforming them into a tangible path forward. And, Sterling added, a hint of his old self returning, but tempered with genuine admiration, "Should you ever consider a career in strategic analysis, my company would be honored to have someone of your caliber on board. Think of it less as an offer and more as a standing invitation." Sarah, her voice thick with emotion, managed, "Mr. Sterling, I don't know what to say." "Say nothing," he replied, a genuine warmth in his tone that had been absent before. "Just show the world what that brilliant mind of yours can achieve." Maria rushed forward, embracing Sarah tightly, murmuring words of love and pride. The mother and daughter, once bound by the strictures of their humble circumstances, now stood on the precipice of an unimaginable future. Sarah's victory was not merely about a prize. It was about breaking barriers, inspiring hope, and proving that true worth lay not in inherited wealth or social standing, but in the indomitable spirit of intellect and determination. As she looked towards the future, boundless and bright, Sarah knew this was just the first move in a life destined for greatness. The jet was a symbol, but the opportunity, the recognition, and the empowerment were the true treasures she had won, charting a course that was truly limitless.